Shalom Alaikum. My name is Elijah. We're now 4/5 of the way through this series. So far we have covered 3 of the fallacious arguments postulated by Pat, who routinely ignores impartial exegesis when attempting to employ a biblical defense of his agenda. Each argument has drawn a blank. But can his claim that the naked young man of Mark, chapter 14, verses 51 to 52, offers some kind of evidence for a gay Jesus save his reputation? I'm not going to hold my breath. Mark 14, 51 to 52, and a certain young man was following him, having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body. And when they seized him, he left the linen cloth, and fled from them naked. Now that we have established how the quote reads, I'd like to put forward a couple of questions. Why does Pat fail to point out that Yeshua was not recorded as being alone with the young man at any time? 11 of the 12 future princes of the tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples, were present. So why is he intent upon giving the impression that there was some kind of secret rendezvous? And why does he fail to inform his audience that nowhere in Mark 14 is Yeshua described as having any physical contact with the young man? Yeshua is not described as even having acknowledged him, he was simply following Yeshua. No other details exist, yet Pat rings this single brief citation for everything it's worth, playing the role of obscurant, without compunction. Given the obscure and unsuggestive nature of the quote, his only motive can be to foist a homosexualist interpretation on a predominantly naive public. As there is no mention in Mark 14 of any homosexual activity taking place, or having taken place, we must cast aside Pat's perverted exegesis, and consider only the information contained in the scriptural text. What are the objective facts? What information can be gleaned from the limited material on offer? I'll start by making the viewer aware that the English translation for young man comes from the ancient Greek word Neaniskos, and means a youth. The term applied to any male under 40 years of age. The ancient Greek words used to indicate a homosexual relationship, eros for the elder man, the pursuer and active participant, and eromenos for a younger man, the pursued and passive participant, are never used to describe any relationship between the youth and Yeshua, so there is absolutely no indication of anything pedophilic taking place in Mark 14, verses 51 to 52. There exists a majority opinion among New Testament scholars, including the late John Rushdie, that the youth had just been baptized in the Kidron brook, subsequently dressing himself in a garment of linen cloth, which was later torn off from him by the temple guards. As befitting the theology and practices found in the Synoptic Gospels, it is a far more plausible explanation than a homoerotic encounter in what was essentially a public park, which would be more in keeping with the sexual habits of 20th and 21st century homosexuals. Perhaps less probable, though entirely feasible, is the hypothesis that the young man was Lazarus, still wearing his grave clothes as a testimony to his miraculous resurrection by Rabbi Yeshua. I, however, would argue for the most obvious explanation. There was simply a local man disturbed from his sleep by the commotion of the approaching temple guards, and gone out to investigate. The Garden of Gethsemane is located in the Kidron Valley. The approach of the temple guards would have been via the valley, at night. The Kidron Valley was always well inhabited, being situated between the densely populated hillsides of the Mount Olivet and Mount Zion. So it's probable that the temple guards disturbed the local, who then went out in his bedclothes to take a nosy. Either way, wild speculations of homosexual activity certainly suggest more about Pat than anything in Mark 14 suggests about Yeshua. Last, but by no means least, we come to the issue of semantics. When reading an English translation of a Koine Greek manuscript, one dated in excess of over 2,000 years old, and describing events set in the ancient Middle East, as is the case regarding the Synoptic Gospels, it is never wise to apply a contemporary English understanding to ambiguous words and phrases found in the original manuscripts. This is certainly true of the word naked. The Greek word used for naked is the adjective gumnos. In Mark 14, gumnos is used in the sense of lightly clad, or without an outer garment. Within the context of Mark 14, it refers to being without a cloak or tunic, and is not a reference to literal nakedness. In John 21:7 we find a precedent for the use of gumnos as a non-literal adjective. As there is no other information given in the scriptures, one can only conclude that Pat assumed the youth to be gay, because he was naked. But as we have seen, the term wasn't being applied in a literal sense. The youth was wearing linen clothing, he wasn't in the flesh until the temple guards attempted to seize him, tearing off his garment in the process. So according to Pat's warped logic, the temple guards were all gay? After all, they were the ones who stripped him. It wasn't voluntary nudity. Or perhaps Pat was under the impression that wearing linen clothing was some indication of homosexuality. But that wouldn't add up. Would we conclude that the fishermen of Galilee and the locals must all have been gay, too? They often wore similar clothing. It would make as much sense as anything else Pat claims. Ultimately, to what does Pat's argument amount? If a homosexualist decides to employ perverted eisegesis, reading into a piece of scripture something which simply is not contained within that piece of scripture, you're gay. This is Pat's evidence. Another epic fail. Until next time.